Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to the latest installment of Freedom IoT's webinar series. My name is Brad Short. I will be the moderator for today's event, and I am joined by Jeff Price, Vice President and General Manager of Freedom IoT. Jeff will be our presenter for this afternoon's webinar. We want to thank you for joining us today and are looking forward to sharing information with all of you as it relates to the myths and perceived challenges that manufacturers cite when discussing implementations for industrial IoT solutions. We will review these perceived challenges and also focus on how you can overcome these obstacles and how successful projects are planned, implemented, and then flourishing within their new environments. Before I hand this over to Jeff, I have a few additional items to cover before we get started. The agenda for today will include a brief introduction to our company history and background, which has helped position our team as a trusted IoT and OEE partner to many manufacturing companies, both large and small. From there, we will review what has become known as Industry 4.0 and Industrial IoT, or IIoT. And we'll discuss how solutions in this space are benefiting manufacturers by providing better transparency with real-time and historical data, which promotes better decision-making and better transparency with real-time data. This information is rooted in the data collected from their shop floor equipment. As the presentation begins, I will be monitoring the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar. If you have questions at any time during the presentation, we encourage you to utilize this tool in the webinar menu. We will be answering questions in real time within the Q&A tool, and we'll also have an opportunity to take questions within the webinar for the entire group at the end of the presentation. Please do not hesitate to engage. We encourage it, and we look forward to hearing from you. Without any further ado, I'd again like to introduce everyone to Jeff Price. Sir, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Brad. So in our last webinar series, as we talked about the top 5 manufacturing metrics. And so we went through that in some detail, but what we showed is that we augmented a lot of that with some automation from an IIoT solution as part of our top 5 manufacturing metrics. And so in this series is that what we want to talk about is how easy it is to get started with an IoT strategy. So there's often maybe some myths that we're going to talk about, some things that could be challenging or perceived to be challenging. And so about 3 of those things are financial investment and justification, being able to connect all of your assets as opposed to just a few of them and leaving others on islands. And then the third one is talk about some security recommendations. So there's a lot of cloud solutions, on-premise solutions. So we want to talk briefly about all of that and how the value that you can bring to your organization with an IoT strategy. So first, a little bit about us. All right, so the name of our company is Freedom IoT. So we have a long-standing history in the space. So we have been doing this for probably 20 years now, maybe under different ownership. We were actually born out of MAG IAS, which was a multinational automation company, machine tool company. And we spun out in 2013. And our product is called Freedom, which is an IIoT platform, and we monitor any kind of discrete manufacturing assets in the various industries that you see here on the left. We have a lot of experience. As I like to say, is that our team, has a combination of OT and IT, which makes us, I think, a little bit eclectic in that nature. So, because of our background in manufacturing and operations, is that we have a lot of great manufacturing of experience. But then we also have a lot of experience in the IT world, and working with implementing these kinds of strategies within our customers. So at its core is that our product called Freedom is that we're able to connect every asset on the shop floor, and that we can bring real-time information to all the stakeholders in the company to where you can get some dramatic improvements in your business. So, okay, let's move on. So one of the first challenges we want to talk about is that let's talk about exactly what IoT is. All right, so there's a lot of buzzwords and phrases, that are associated with IIoT. And in fact, IIoT was, I think, first coined by GE. So we'd heard a lot about IoT and a lot in the home automation markets, but IIoT was first, I think, coined by GE. In parallel is that you had countries like Germany that had actually clarified it as the fourth industrial revolution. So you can see we had the first three revolutions about 100 years apart from each other, with the third one being really the rapid adoption of computers and automation in everybody's business and in manufacturing. So this fourth one is really sort of fusing and is actually almost like an acceleration of the third one. So it's like fusing the physical, which would be the machines, the devices, the manufacturing areas, with the digital, the IT world, with the biological, which is us, which is the people. So with that convergence is that of OT and IT, is that then you have industrial assets that can communicate with computers, with other computers, with each other, and store information about themselves. They can be done in public and private infrastructure, and it brings a lot of real-time analytics applications where you can transform that into actionable information, and it's also set up so that it's easily consumed by people. All right, so in the end is that it really enables industries to have better transparency and automated decision making in their operations. So things that we can transform and take some action very quickly. So with that said, is that the next thing is that how do you implement? All right, and so this seems like it's very futuristic. All right, but it's actually not as expensive as you might think it would be. All right, and not as difficult as it might be to implement. So let's talk a little bit about the first myth, is that how do we offset the financial investment risk? So this sounds like rocket science, right? It sounds like maybe this is not exactly, it's all futuristic and my operation can't benefit for it and we certainly couldn't afford it. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just go through just a quick justification, all right? And we're going to start with some of the assumptions that we might make with that. So what we see with an IIoT value proposition is that we really see that we can really get a lot of productivity improvements. So in other words, is that we're running the equipment more often. We have a better understanding of our cycle times. We have a great understanding of what our downtime is and what it costs us, which then allows for dramatic cost reduction. It also means for process improvement. So it's a great tool for lean manufacturing and Six Sigma engineers, and really anybody, any stakeholder. So you can really get a lot of low-hanging fruit by implementing a strategy like this. And the good news that you have is that when you start to run the equipment more often, you get more utilization, or OEE, if you will, out of this equipment, is that other things start to happen. So in other words, if you turn the product quicker, then your margins improve, and then guess what? Your inventories reduce, which is when you get into some of the big money. And then you can see some of the other benefits here. So just as an example, what I'd like to do is just walk through just a quick justification. So on our website is that you can see the URL down here, is that we have an ROI calculator. And so I'm going to run through a quick example here on just exactly how the justification would go for this type of a product. So there are some assumptions that I've already made in this example. Now, when I did this is that I purposely made this very conservative in my opinion. So for instance, here is that what we're really looking at is that what is the overhead and labor cost per hour. So if you look at this, I'm saying is that for every machine, is that it's about $100 an hour labor and overhead rate. Here, I'm going to actually reduce this. I'm going to call this really a sort of a two-shift operation. So we're running 5 days a week, 40 hours, 80 hours total for both shifts, 50 weeks a year, and we have about 10 machines in this example. So you can see is that if you just apply this burn rate, you're at about $4 million worth of operating cost. So let's make some assumptions on where we think our OEE is. So with availability, meaning how often is the machine in cycle, is that we often see things, higher slightly or maybe even lower, but I'm going to use 65% in this example. I'm going to say that the performance, which would be indicative of how close are we to our cycle times, I'm going to say that's typically pretty decent, so call it 90%. Quality rates, which is yield, let's call that 95%. So if we looked at our $4 million worth of operating cost, is that you can see on average is that our unproductive costs are pushing about $1.8 million each year out of the 4 million. So let's look at what the investment, so a typical investment in, say, in our product, in Freedom eLog, is that for 10 machines, is that investment is just slightly under $50,000. So you could say is that if you could raise your OEE 1%, is that you'll cover most of this cost in the first year, right? So actually, if you had it 1.21%. Now, I mentioned in the previous slide is that we typically see minimum 10 to 20% right when we launch. So obviously, the payback is going to be, a lot quicker. So here is if we factor in maybe the time value of money, is that using a 10% discount rate like you would in a capital justification. And let's just say that maybe we can improve this 5% in the first year and 5% in the second year, then we really have a dramatic increase, to our bottom line. And we actually pay for a product like this in 3 months, and from someone like myself who I've done a lot of capital justifications in my career, is that it used to be 2 years was the hurdle rate, and then it went down to 1 year. But something like this is that if you're 6 months or less, and you can drive this kind of improvement to the bottom line, is that this would be a great project, right? And this would be a great addition, to the operation. So we have this available. It's out on our website, all right? And so you can see, you can just go to freedomiot.com and you'll find it, but here is the URL, and we can make that available to anybody that would like to play around with that. But just check us out, and you too can run your situation out on our website. Okay, so let's move on from the financial investment, and let's talk about legacy assets. All right, so one of the other myths that we run into is that, guys, this sounds all really great, but I've got older machines, I have some newer machines, and I even have some older machines that I would consider that are critical, critical to the operation. And so with this being kind of a newer technology, then we probably can't connect to everything, right? And so maybe we can only get 10%. That's maybe the wide opinion out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about being able to connect to any asset. So with any IoT strategy, is that you have interfaces that you use to connect to the machine that will make those machines communicate their status or their data information to an IoT platform such as Freedom. All right, so we bring both of those to to our customers, and specifically when it comes to machine interfaces, is that we offer machine interfaces for all the modern controls that you see along the bottom, CNCs, PLCs, robots, and so on. All right, and those are all done in software. And then oftentimes, those interfaces can be installed as small programs that just run silently in the background, mining out data and sending it off to an IoT platform. But is that we also have hardware devices that for those older machines, and we've seen quite a few of those, machines that could be 30 years old, all right, is that there's still a way to get data from them. And in those cases, is that we use a hardware appliance, all right, and so those hardware appliances can mount right into the electrical panel, and that you can then wire those right into the IOs. Think about as if you were wiring those into, say, the stack light, that is most every machine has. So at least on those stack lights, typically it goes on and off when the machine is running, or it's in a fault condition, or if it loses power, and so on. So we can pick up a lot of data just even on older machines. here's an example of some of them. So these are commercial off the shelf. So in the past, we had to engineer this kind of device, but in the last 5 years, is these types of devices have come on to the market, and we have now are using. Most of the time, we're using this device right here. Right. So this device is from a company called Wago, and this is from a company called Moxa. Both are very similar in nature. Basically, is that it looks just like a little PLC, and under the hood, it really is. Right. And so here is that you can add you can add different modules onto this device. We typically come out with just a couple on there, but it allows you then to wire that right to the I/O, like the stack light, like I mentioned earlier. And then you can connect it right to your network. And so the reason we like this device a lot is because it has an IoT interface called MT Connect that resides right on board here. So it makes it really simple to take this and wire it straight into a legacy machine, connect it right into your network, and then that feeds the data right into Freedom, our IIoT platform. And from there, like I said, you can get all kinds of different data. We typically look for power, cycle, alarm conditions, but you can also use these devices to augment newer machines where maybe you don't have the sensors on the machine that you'd like. Good examples of those might be temperature, vibration. We've used them a lot of times for fluid monitoring and other things, right? So I think the point being is that we basically, there's not an asset or machine that you cannot connect to. I mean, we've connected to washers, PLCs, duplex mills, I mean, all kinds of different things. Actually, pneumatic punch presses, we've connected to those as well. So I think there's something here for everyone, and it doesn't have to be costly. Is that these things usually are about $1,000 a piece, and then so it's pretty simple. The cost has come down quite a bit, and the quality of the component is very high. What kind of data you can get out of this is that for the different types of interfaces, I think I mentioned this, is that for these hardware, you are a little bit limited, and just because it is a legacy machine, but you're only limited to how much I/O that you want to connect to it. All right, so we typically connect these 3 data items, but you could connect more. For our software interfaces, then you can get this kind of data out of the software interfaces, and that gets sent directly to Freedom platform. If you really want to get into some process monitoring or machine health, then you can still get a lot of analog data by implementing additional sensors or using the software interface to connect to the data that may already exist on the machine controller. Okay, so the third myth is security challenges. So we run into a lot of companies because we typically start working with the OT guys, the operational technology guys. And so sometimes what we hear is that there's no way that our IT team is going to let us do this or connect this up. And so I can tell you is that we've worked with a lot of IT teams, and typically what we try to do is basically integrate into things that they already have. All right, so some of the challenges that you typically run into is, maybe threefold. So for machines, is that the first thing is that most people are concerned with connecting the machines to a network. A lot of the machines really don't have virus protection on them. A lot of them are running Windows in the background. They might even have an old operating system like Windows XP or something like that. So there's a lot of concern about connecting those to a network. And then on top of that is that they're also afraid of these same computers, if connected to a network, is that they might try to go automatically update their operating systems out on the web, and then you might have a problem to where now maybe the machine doesn't work like it did before. There's other vulnerabilities that everybody faces is that are introduced by users. So for instance, you have to get programs on and off the machines or other things, and so USB sticks and other things also can introduce some vulnerabilities. Another challenge is that communication. So what kind of data and where is it going? And is it leaving my plant? And those are typically the kinds of conversations that we get into. So the first thing that we recommend is that how confidential is it? So typically technology such as this is that it's really just communicating machine state changes. So basically the machine's in cycle, it's out of cycle, it's running this program. And so realistically is that there's not a lot of intellectual property or something that you could actually use, as to re-engineer a part or to try to use that kind of information. However, that's all in the eyes of the beholder. It's all in the eyes of the customer. Network architecture is sometimes, how are we going to connect all this up? We typically always use Ethernet to do that. And then what are the methods of how you're going to transmit that? So even if we don't think that it is confidential or whether it isn't, is the data encrypted? What if people got a hold of it? And so on. Then finally is that where is the IoT platform hosted? So if you're looking at cloud hosting, is that there's usually a shared responsibility there. All right, so you have people like Amazon, Azure, other infrastructure as a service platforms as well, and they have a responsibility for keeping their customers safe. And the two I mentioned here do a really great job with that, with Amazon and Azure. And then there's the responsibility of the application, the IIoT platform itself. So things of way for how does the information get out to users, how do they authenticate, and how do you keep all of that private. So in the next couple of slides, I'm gonna show a couple of different recommendations. So this is a simple network architecture, and this is a cloud hosting example. All right, so what you have here and what we see with a lot of customers is that we see isolated networks. I say isolated, but they're isolated with a firewall in between them. So there is connectivity, but they try to isolate as much traffic as they can. So you would have a factory network here to where all your assets are on this same factory network. And then it is connected to the enterprise network, which is still part of the customer's IT, their IT network. But there is a firewall connection to where they can control what traffic goes back and forth. Typically is that any of this information is communicated then through this firewall. And so there's usually rules that would just allow outbound traffic only, no inbound traffic. And then it would go to a concentrated machine data server. So this would be from the IoT provider, such as Freedom, such as us. And then from there, only one computer can get out to the internet. All right. And so then from there is that data from all these machines. So these machines aren't individually going straight to the web. They can't get to the web. All right. So because of the firewall, but this one can. So the data flows to here, and then it is posted to the cloud provider where the application resides. And this can be done encrypted. All right. And we've done it a couple different ways. So you can use HTTPS, which everyone is pretty familiar with, or in some cases, we've actually created a VPN tunnel, all right, to keep this communication secure. As far as users consuming the data, is that, there's no substitute for strong credentials and authentication, multi-factor. So there's different ways to secure your authentication when you're coming into a cloud application. Excuse me. And then you can also, is that we can also use HTTPS then to serve the web pages back out to the users. So this is a pretty, like I said, this is a pretty good strategy. You can actually throw more money at this if you'd like, but it comes down to diminished returns in some cases. All right, so you have to really look at your own use case, and you have to look at exactly what kind of information that you're posting and what kind of security that you feel you need to put in place. But this is is probably a minimum when it comes to a cloud hosting environment. Now, there are a lot of customers that, regardless of some of these security strategies, they still are not comfortable with this being in the cloud, with it being outside of their organization. So is that you can also implement this inside your firewall. And so here, it's the same concept, right? So we still have the two layered or the two isolated network that's firewalled. But in this case, what we've done is that the concentrator and the IoT application is now combined on this server, and it's connected to the factory network. All right, so all of this can flow freely, and then users then have firewall rules to get to the application. All right, and so all of that makes that more secure when it comes to this kind of data. And so I think each customer has a really great choice. And I think what the good news here is that a lot of the times is that this is already in place when we come through the door. So we always have, a lot of times we have machines that already have an Ethernet drop connected to the machine. They've already got a firewall situation here. And so a lot of times what we're really implementing is we're implementing this piece and these machine interfaces, and then we have to maybe adjust a few of the firewall rules. And that's really what you get when you're looking for an IoT provider, is that you have someone with that kind of OT and IT experience. They're familiar with being able to work within a customer's IT organization, and along with their OT manufacturing guys as well. Okay, so we talked about those three myths or those three challenges, and so how to overcome. So maybe just to summarize, is that when we talked about the investment, is that realistically any kind of improvement, almost like 3%, is that you're going to pay for this investment in just a few months. It's really not that expensive. It's really super easy to deploy and use. Is that you can integrate this within your existing network architecture. You probably have this already, all right? And you're not looking at months to deploy this. Is oftentimes is that it can be done if it's a lot of software machine interfaces, a lot of this can be done in days or weeks, and most of it could even be done remotely. You get immediate results. So our experience is that when you implement an IoT strategy and you start to publish the data, you're starting to make it visual, you're starting to send it to devices like phones and that sort of thing, is that we typically see about a 10% productivity improvement, in the first month. And we've seen it as, like I said, we've seen it as high as 50%, which only helps improve the investment part of this. With that, is that if you're running the equipment more often, if you're getting higher utilization or higher OEE, is that you'll see a dramatic increase in your product margins. You'll see an equal dramatic decrease in your WIP and finished goods inventory. We've had some customers, because they're now turning their inventory quicker, because they're able to run the machines more often, they're more nimble, and they've been taking days of WIP or days of finished good inventory, out, which now gets into millions of dollars. One of the last things is that I'll talk about on how to overcome is adoption. Is that oftentimes is that you might hear is that, oh, this is just Big Brother, this is just management that is just watching us all the time. All right. So one of the things we like to do is that we say is to dispel that myth and say, realistically, is that this is an ultimate tool for lean and agile continuous improvement. Lean engineers, agile engineers, this is just such a super tool. Is that coming from a background of lean manufacturing myself, is that this would have been a great tool back a few years ago, because you can really get to root cause very quickly. Because instead of documenting this with labor-intensive paper systems, is now you have accurate, and it's quick, it's immediate. You get it right now. You also have all the history that you can look back in time. So you really have a lot of information at your fingertips to take, immediate action. Now, when it comes to the big brother part of this is that these kind of strategies truly unemotionally highlights the manufacturing process and machine reliability issues. What we often tell operators is that this is your chance, all right? So this is your chance to highlight things that have been going on that you've probably told managers or supervisors or others of the problems that you've been having with the process, whether that's tools or with the machines or anything else in that matter. So, you know, take the advantage of this being your voice for continuous improvement. Okay, some strategies to get started. So we like to say, hey, you need to really begin with the end in mind, but don't get so hung up on it. Just, you know, get started. All right, so sit down with your teams and clearly define your problem. Identify where you think your pain points are and build up your use cases. Also, try and understand from metrics, how are you going to measure success? So as I mentioned in our last webinar series is that we talked about the top 5 manufacturing metrics. So think about those sorts of things and how you're going to measure it. Take a look at your culture. We talked a little bit about that in the previous slide with adoption. You know, are you continuous improvement oriented, or minded? And have a look at how you're going to launch this. So launching it successfully, this is no different than launching a lean manufacturing or Six Sigma type of project. Select an operational champion. So you need someone to really drive the IIoT project part and parcel with the continuous improvement project. We really recommend an operational champion versus an informational champion. Select all the resources that you need to implement the project. They're typically going to come from manufacturing engineering, maintenance, operations, IT, right? You need just a small team to get this going and make it successful. Look at whatever kind of constraints you might have, you know, so it still is an investment. So you need to go do your homework. A lot of this is like running through a capital project, what kind of issues you might run into or roadblocks with security, accessibility, et cetera. Determine what kind of equipment you might need, whether that's Ethernet drops or whether that's any other IT equipment other than what the IoT provider can provide. And then finally, select us. Select us as like your manufacturing IT solutions provider because we can truly help you navigate through all of these challenges. So I went through that kind of quickly, all right? And so, but I hope that you got some value out of that. And so with that, I will open it up and see if we might have any questions.
Thanks, Jeff. At this time, I don't have any open questions from the field. If there are any at this time, please raise your hand. We will engage with you and take those. Further, as we wrap up today's event, we want to remind everyone that if you would like to view any of our previous web events, they can be found in the About section of our website, freedomiot.com. And additionally, if you're interested in learning more about the Freedom software, if you'd like to see a live demo of the product, or if you're interested in discussing a no-risk trial on your own equipment, you can contact us directly, either through email, which is available through the invitation for today's event, as well as you can contact us through our website anytime. Again, that's freedomiot.com. We look forward to connecting with you and your teams and discussing potential project goals in more detail in the future. If there's no additional questions in today's event, we appreciate everybody joining and hope you have a safe and productive rest of the week. Look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great day.
Thank you for attending. Have a great day.